Greetings. I am Society Archer, and welcome to another episode of the reading of the Tales of Norse Mythology by Helen A. Guerber. Again, here's the book and the spine. Today's chapter will be Chapter 3, Frigga. The Queen of the Gods. Frigga, or Frigg, daughter of Fjorgen and sister of Jord, according to some mythologists, is considered by others as a daughter of Jord and Odin, whom she eventually married. This wedding caused such general rejoicing in Asgard, where the goddess was greatly beloved, that ever after it was customary to celebrate its anniversary with feast and song. And the goddess being declared patroness of marriage, her health was always proposed with that of Odin and Thor at wedding feasts. Frigga was goddess of the atmosphere, or rather of the clouds, and as such was represented as wearing either snow white or dark garments, according to her somewhat variable moods. She was queen of the gods, and she alone had the privilege of sitting on the throne, Hlidskjalf, beside her august husband. From thence she too could look over all the world and see what was happening. And according to the belief of our ancestors, she possessed the knowledge of the future, which, however, no one could ever prevail upon her to reveal, thus proving that northern women could keep a secret inviolate. Of me the gods are sprung, and all that is to come I know but lock in my own breast, and have to none revealed. Balder Dead by Matthew Arnold. She was generally represented as a tall, beautiful, and stately woman, crowned with heron plumes, the symbol of silence or forgetfulness, and clothed in pure white robes, secured at the waist by a golden girdle, from which hung a bunch of keys, the distinctive sign of the northern housewife, whose special patroness she was said to be. Although she often appeared beside her husband, Frigga preferred to remain in her own place, called Finsalir, the Hall of Mists, or of the Sea, where she diligently plied her wheel or distaff, spinning golden thread, or weaving long webs of bright-colored clouds. In order to perform this work, she made use of a marvelous jeweled spinning wheel or distaff, which at night shone brightly in the sky as a constellation, known in the north as Frigga's spinning wheel, while the inhabitants of the south called the same stars Orion's girdle. To her hall, Finsalir, the gracious goddess, invited husbands and wives who had led virtuous lives on earth, so they might enjoy each other's companionship even after death, and never be called upon to part again. There in the glade, Finsalir stands, the house of Freyja, the honored mother of the gods, and shows its lighted windows and open doors. Balder Dead by Matthew Arnold. Frigga was therefore considered the goddess of conjugal and motherly love, and was specially worshipped by married lovers and tender parents. This exalted office did not entirely absorb her thoughts, however, for we are told that she was very fond of dress, and whenever she appeared before the assembled gods, her attire was rich and becoming, and her jewels chosen with much taste. Frigga's love of adornment once led her sadly astray, for in her longing to possess some new ornament, she secretly purloined a piece of gold from a statue representing her husband, which had just been placed in his temple. The stolen metal was entrusted to the dwarves with instructions to fashion a marvelous necklace for her use. This, when finished, was so resplendent that it greatly enhanced her charms, and even increased Odin's love for her. But when he discovered the theft of the gold, he angrily summoned the dwarves and bade them reveal who had dared to touch his statue. Unwilling to betray the queen of the gods, the dwarves remained obstinately silent, and seeing that no information could be elicited from them, Odin commanded that the statue should be placed above the temple gate, and set to work to devise runes which should endow it with the power of speech and enable it to denounce the thief. When Frigga heard these tidings, she trembled with fear, and implored her favorite attendant, Fulla, to invent some means of protecting her from All-Father's wrath. Fulla, who was always ready to serve her mistress, immediately departed, and soon returned, accompanied by a hideous dwarf, who promised to prevent the statue from speaking if Frigga would only deign to smile graciously upon him. This boon having been granted, the dwarf hastened off to the temple, caused a deep sleep to fall upon the guards, and while they were thus unconscious, pulled the statue down from its pedestal and broke it to pieces, so that it could never betray Frigga's theft, in spite of all Odin's efforts to give it the power of speech. Odin, discovering this sacrilege on the morrow, was very angry indeed, so angry that he left Asgard and utterly disappeared, carrying away with him all the blessings which he had been wont to shower upon gods and men. According to some authorities, his brothers, as we've already seen, took advantage of his absence to assume his form and secure possession of his throne and wife. But although they looked exactly like him, they could not restore the lost blessings, and allowed the ice giants, or Jotuns, to invade the earth and bind it fast in their cold fetters. These wicked giants pinched the leaves and buds till they all shriveled up, stripped the trees bare, shrouded the earth in a great white coverlet, and veiled it in impenetrable mists. But at the end of 7 weary months the true Odin returned and relented, and when he saw all the evil that had been done, he drove the usurpers away, forced the frost giants to relax their grip of the earth and to release her from her icy bonds, and again showered all his blessings down upon her, cheering her with the light of his smile. As has already been seen, Odin, though god of wit and wisdom, was sometimes no match for his wife Frigga, who, womanlike, was sure to obtain her way by some means. On one occasion, the august pair was seated upon Hildskjalf, gazing with interest upon the Winielers and Vandals, who were prepared for a battle which was to decide which people should henceforth have supremacy. Odin gazed with satisfaction upon the Vandals, who were loudly praying to him for victory. But Frigga watched the movements of the Winielers with more attention, because they had entreated her aid. She therefore turned to Odin and coaxingly inquired whom he meant to favor on the morrow. He, wishing to evade her question, declared he would not decide as it was time for bed, but would give the victory to those upon whom his eyes first rested in the morning. This answer was shrewdly calculated, for Odin knew his couch was so turned that upon waking he would face the Vandals, and he intended looking out from thence, instead of waiting until he had mounted his throne. But although so cunningly contrived, this plan was frustrated by Frigga, who, divining his purpose, waited until he was sound asleep, and then noiselessly turned his couch so that he should face her favorites. Then she sent word to the Winielers to dress their women in armor, and send them out in battle array at dawn, with their long hair carefully combed down over their cheeks and breasts. Take them, thy women folk, maidens and wives. Over your ankles lace on the white war hose. Over your bosoms link up the hard mail nets. Over your lips plait long tresses with cunning. So war beast full bearded King Odin shall deem you, when all the grey sea beach at sunrise you greet him. The Longbeard Saga, Charles Kingsley. These instructions were carried out with scrupulous exactness, and when Odin awoke the next morning, his conscious glance fell upon their armed host, and he exclaimed in surprise, "What Longbeards are those?" In German, the ancient word for Longbeards was Langobarden, which was the name used to designate the Lombards. Frigga, upon hearing this exclamation, which she had foreseen, immediately cried out in triumph that Allfather had given them a new name, and was in honor bound to follow the usual northern custom and give also a baptismal gift. A name thou hast given them shames neither thee nor them. Well can they wear it. Give them the victory. First have they greeted thee. Give them the victory, yoke fellow mine. The Longbeard Saga, Charles Kingsley. Odin, seeing he had been so cleverly outwitted, made no demur, and in memory of the victory which his favor vouchsafed to them, the Winielers retained the name given by the King of the Gods, who ever after watched over them with special care, giving them many blessings, among others a home in the sunny south on the fruitful plains of Lombardy. Frigga had, as her own special attendants, a number of beautiful maidens, among whom were Vola, her sister, according to some authorities, to whom she entrusted her jewel casket. Fulla always presided over her mistress's toilet, was privileged to put on her golden shoes, attended her everywhere, was her confidant, and often advised her how best to help the mortals who implored her aid. Fulla was very beautiful indeed, and had long golden hair, which she wore flowing loose over her shoulders, restrained only by a golden circlet or snood. As her hair was emblematic of the golden grain, the circlet represented the binding of the sheaf. Fulla was also known as Abundia or Bundantia in some parts of Germany, where she was considered the symbol of the fullness of the earth. Hlyn, Frigga's second attendant, was the goddess of consolation, sent out to kiss away the tears of mourners and pour balm into hearts wrung by grief. She also listened with ever-open ears to the prayers of mortals, carrying them to her mistress and advising her at times how best to answer them and give the desired relief. Njá was Frigga's swift messengers, mounted upon her fleet steed, Hoof thrower. She would travel with marvelous rapidity through fire and air, over land and sea, and was therefore considered the personification of the refreshing breeze. Darting thus to and fro, Njá saw all that was happening upon earth, and told her mistress all she knew. On one occasion, as she was passing over Hunaland, she saw King Riri, a lineal descendant of Odin, sitting mournfully by the shore, bewailing his childlessness. The Queen of Heaven, who was also goddess of childbirth, upon hearing this, took an apple, the emblem of fruitfulness, from her private store, gave it to Njá, and bade her carry it to the king. With the rapidity of the element she personified, Njá darted away, and as she passed over Rurir's head, she dropped her apple into his lap with a radiant smile. "What flies up there so quickly driving past?" Her answer from the clouds is rushing by. "I fly not, nor do drive, but hurry fast, hoof flinger swift through cloud and mist and sky." Asgard and the Gods, Wagner MacDowell. The king pondered for a moment upon the meaning of the sudden apparition and gift, and then hurried home, his heart beating high with hope, and gave the apple to his wife to eat. In due season, to his intense joy, she bore him a son, Volsung, the great northern hero, who became so famous that he gave his name to all his race. Besides the three above mentioned, Frigga had other attendants in her train. There was the mild and gracious maiden Lofn, praise or love, whose duty it was to remove all obstacles from the path of lovers. My lily tall from her saddle bearing, I led them forth through the temple faring, to the altar circle where priests among, Lofn's vow she took with unfaltering tongue. Viking Tales of the North, R.B. Anderson. Jolfin's duty was to incline obdurate hearts to love, to make peace and concord among mankind, and to reconcile quarreling husbands and wives. Sin, Truth, guarded the door of Frigga's palace, refusing to open it to those who were not allowed to come in. When she had once shut the door upon a would-be intruder, no appeal would avail to change her decision. She therefore presided over all tribunals and trials, and whenever a thing was to be vetoed, the usual formula was to declare that sin was against it. Gefjon was also one of the maidens in Frigga's palace, and to her were entrusted all those who died unwedded, whom she received and made happy forever. According to some authorities, Gefjon did not remain a virgin herself, but married one of the giants by whom she had 4 sons. The same tradition goes on to declare that Odin sent her before him to visit Gylfi, king of Sweden, and to beg for some land which she might call her own. The king, amused at her request, promised her as much land as she could plow around in one day and night. Gefn, nothing daunted, changed her 4 sons into oxen, harnessed them into a plow, and began to cut a furrow so wide and deep that the king and his courtiers were amazed. But Gefn continued her work without showing any signs of fatigue, and when she had plowed all around a large piece of land, forcibly wrenched it away, and made her oxen drag it down into the sea, where she made it fast and called it Sealand. Gefn drew from Gilfrey, rich and stored up treasure, the land she joined to Denmark, 4 heads and 8 eyes bearing, while hot sweat trickled down them, the often dragged the reft mass that formed this winsome island. Norse Mythology, R.B. Anderson. As for the hollow she left behind her, it was quickly filled with water and formed a lake, at first called Lagrum the sea, but now known as Möller, whose every indention corresponds with the headlands of Sealand. Gefn then married Skjold, one of Odin's sons, and became the ancestors of the royal Danish line of Skjoldans, dwelling in the city of Fildr, or Lethra, which she founded, which became the principal place of sacrifice for the heathen Danes. Ira, also Frigga's attendant, was considered a most skillful physician. She gathered samples all over the earth to cure both wounds and diseases, and it was her province to teach the science to women, who were the only ones to practice medicine among the ancient nations of the north. Gaping wounds are bound by Ira. Valhalla, J.C. Jones. Vara heard all oaths and punished perjurers, while she rewarded those who faithfully kept their word. Then there was also Thor, Faith, who knew all that was to occur throughout the world, and Snoltra, goddess of virtue, who had mastered all knowledge. With such a galaxy of attendants, it is little wonder that Frigga was considered a powerful deity. But in spite of the prominent place she occupied in northern religion, she had no special temple nor shrine, and was but little worshipped except in company with Odin. While Frigga was not known by this name in southern Germany, there were other goddesses worshipped there, whose attributes were so exactly like hers that they were evidently the same, although they bore very different names in the various provinces. Among them was the fair goddess Holda, who graciously dispensed many rich gifts. As she presided over the weather, the people were wont to declare when the snowflakes fell that Frhol was shaking her bed, and when it rained that she was washing her clothes, often pointing to the white clouds as her linen which she had put out to bleach. When long gray strips of clouds drifted across the sky, they said she was weaving, for she was supposed to be also a very diligent weaver, spinner, and housekeeper. It is said she gave flax to mankind and taught them how to use it, and in the Tyrol the following story is told about the way in which she bestowed this invaluable gift. There was once a peasant who daily left his wife and children in the valley to take his sheep up the mountain to pasture, and as he watched his flock grazing on the mountainside, he often had opportunity to use his crossbow and bring down a chamois, whose flesh would furnish his larder with food for many a day. While pursuing a fine animal one day, he saw it disappear behind a boulder, and when he came to the spot, he was amazed to see a doorway in the neighboring glacier. For in the excitement of the pursuit, he had climbed higher and higher until he was now on top of the mountain, where glittered the everlasting snow. The shepherd boldly passed through the open door and soon found himself in a wonderful jeweled cave hung with stalactites, in the center of which stood a beautiful woman clad in silvery robes and attended by a host of lovely maidens crowned with alpine roses. In his surprise, the shepherd sank to his knees, and as in a dream heard the queenly central figure bid him choose anything he saw to carry away with him. Although dazzled by the glow of the precious stones around him, the shepherd's eyes constantly reverted to a little nosegay of blue flowers, which the gracious apparition held in her hand, and he now timidly proffered a request that it might become his. Smiling with pleasure, Hulda, for it was she, gave it to him, telling him he had chosen wisely and would live as long as the flowers did not droop and fade. Then, giving the shepherd a measure of seed which he told him to sow in his field, the goddess bade him be gone, and as the thunder pealed and the earth shook, the poor man found himself out upon the mountainside once again, and slowly wended his way home to his wife, to whom he told his adventure and showed the lovely blue flowers and the measure of seed. The woman reproached her husband bitterly for not having brought some of the precious stones she had so glowingly described, instead of the blossoms and seed. Nevertheless, the man proceeded to sow the latter, and he found to his surprise the measure supplied seed enough for several acres. Soon the little green shoots began to appear, and one moonlit night, when all the peasant was gazing upon them as was his wont. For he felt a curious attraction to the field which he had sown, and often lingered there wondering what kind of grain would be produced. He saw a misty form hover above the field, with hands outstretched as if in blessing. At last the field blossomed, and countless little blue flowers opened the calyxes to the golden sun. When the flowers had withered and the seed was ripe, Hulda came once more to teach the peasant and his wife how to harvest the flax, for such it was, and from it to spin, weave, and bleach linen. As the people of the neighborhood willingly purchased both linen and flax seed, the peasant and his wife soon grew very rich indeed. And while he plowed, sowed, and harvested, she spun, wove, and bleached the linen. The man lived to a good old age, and saw his grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow up around him. All this time, his carefully treasured bouquet had remained fresh as when he first brought it home. But one day he saw that during the night the flowers had drooped and were dying. Knowing what this portended, that he too must die, the peasant climbed the mountain once more to the glacier, and found again the doorway for which he had often vainly searched. He entered the icy portal and was never seen or heard of again, for, according to the legend, the goddess took him under her care and bade him live in her cave, where his every wish was gratified. According to a medieval tradition, Hulda dwelt in a cave in the Horselberg, in Thuringia, where she was known as Frau Venus, and was considered as an enchantress who lured mortals into her realm, where she detained them forever, steeping their senses in all measure of sensual pleasures. The most famous of her victims was Tannhauser, who, after he had lived under her spell for a season, experienced a revulsion of feeling which loosened her bonds over his spirit and induced anxious thoughts concerning his soul. He escaped from her power and hastened to Rome to confess his sins and seek absolution. But when the Pope heard of his association with one of the pagan goddesses whom the priests taught were nothing but demons, he declared that the knight could no more hope for pardon than to see his staff bear buds and bloom. Blah, 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 blah. Haste thou within the nets of Satan lain? Hast thou thy soul to her perdition pledged? Hast thou the lip to hell's enchantress lent, to drain damnation from her reeking cup? Then know that sooner from the withered staff, that in my hand I hold green leaves shall spring, than from the brand and hellfire scorcher bloom, the blossoms of salvation. Tannhauser, Owen Meredith. Crushed with grief at this pronouncement, Tannhauser fled, and despite the entreaties of his faithful friend Eckhart, no great time elapsed ere he returned to the Horselberg, where he vanished within the cave. He had no sooner disappeared, however, than the Pope's messengers arrived, proclaiming that he was pardoned, for the withered staff had miraculously bloomed, thus proving to all there was no sin too heinous to be pardoned, providing repentance was sincere. Dashed to the hip with travel, dued with haste, a flying post, and in his hand he bore a withered staff overflourished with green leaves, who followed by a crown of youth and eld. Picture. That sang to stun with sound the lark in heaven, a miracle from Rome. Glory to God that makes the bare bough green, sprang in the midst and hot for answer, asked dews of the night Tannhauser. Hulda was also the owner of a magic fountain called Quickborn, which rivaled the famed Fountain of Youth, and of a chariot in which she rode from place to place when she inspected her domain. This vehicle, having once suffered damage, the goddess bade a wheelwright repair it, and when he had finished, told him to keep some chips as his pay. The man was indignant at such a meager reward, and kept only a very few of the number. But to his surprise, he found those on the morrow changed to gold. Frigga, thy wife, this way she reins her harness of rams. Hey, how she whirls the golden whip, the luckless beasts unboundedly bleat, her wheels wildly she rattles. Wrath is lit in her look. Wagner, Foreman's translation. The Saxon goddess Easter, or Ostera, goddess of spring, whose name has survived in the English word Easter, is also identical to Frigga, for she too is considered goddess of the earth, or rather of nature's resurrection after the long death of winter. This gracious goddess was so dearly loved by the old Teutons that even after Christianity had been introduced, they retained so pleasant a recollection of her that they refused to have her degraded to the rank of a demon, like many of their other divinities, and transferred her name to the great East Christian feast. It had long been customary, by the way, it had long been customary to celebrate this day by the exchange of presents of colored eggs, for the egg is a type of the beginning of life. So the early Christians continued to observe this rule, declaring, however, that the egg is also symbolical of the resurrection. In various parts of Germany, stone altars can still be seen, which are known as Easter stones, because they were dedicated to the fair goddess Astara. They were crowned with flowers by the young people, who danced gaily around them by the light of great bonfires, a species of popular games practiced until the middle of the present century, in spite of the priest's denunciations and the repeatedly published edicts against them. In other parts of Germany, Frigga, Hoda, or Austera is known by the name of Brekta, Bertha, or the White Lady. She is best known under this title in Thuringia, where she is supposed to dwell in the hollow mountain, keeping watch over the Heimchen, souls of unborn children, and of those who died unbaptized. This is not relevant to Northern mythology. But I digress. Let's continue. Here Bertha watched over agriculture, caring for the plants, which her infant troop watered carefully, for each babe was supposed to carry a little jar for that express purpose. While the goddess was duly respected and her retreat unmolested, she remained where she was, but tradition relates that she once left the country with her infant train dragging her plow, and settled elsewhere to continue her kind ministrations. Bertha is the legendary ancestress of several noble families, and she is supposed to be the same as the industrious queen of the same name, the mythical mother of Charlemagne, whose era has become proverbial, for in speaking of the Golden Age in France and Germany, it is customary to say, in the days when Bertha spun. As this Bertha is supposed to have developed a very large and flat foot, continually pressing the treadle of her wheel, she is often represented in medieval art as a woman with a splay foot, and hence known as La Reina Pedeke. As ancestress of the imperial house of Germany, the White Lady is supposed to appear in the palace before a death or misfortune in the family, and this superstition is still so rife in Germany that the newspapers in 1884 contained the official report of a sentinel who declared that he had seen her flit past him in one of the palace corridors. As Bertha was renowned for her spinning, she naturally was regarded as the special patroness of that branch of female industry, and was said to flit through the streets of every village at nightfall during the 12 nights between Christmas and January 6th, peering into every window to inspect the spinning of the household. The maidens whose work had been carefully performed were rewarded by a present of one of her own golden threads, or a distaff full of extra fine flax. But wherever a careless spinner was found, her wheel was broken, her flax soiled, and if she had failed to honor the goddess by eating plenty of the cakes baked at that period of the year, she was cruelly punished. In Mecklenburg, this same goddess is known as Frigga, or Wold, the female form of Wotan or Odin, and her appearance is always considered the harbinger of great prosperity. She is also supposed to be a great huntress and to lead the wild hunt, mounted upon a white horse, her attendants being changed to hounds and all manners of beasts. This is... No, I do not like this book. I do not like Miss Guerber's writings here. A lot of the things she's mixing is preposterous. It does not hold consistent even with the commonly held, or even not so commonly held, mythoses. Back to the reading. In Holland she is called Verelde, and from her the Milky Way is known by the Dutch as Vereldenstraat, while in parts of northern Germany she is called Northus, Mother Earth. Her sacred car was kept on an island, presumably Rügen, where the priests guarded it carefully until she appeared to take a yearly journey out her realm to bless the land. The goddess, her face completely hidden by a thick veil, then sat in this car, which was drawn by 2 cows, and she was respectfully escorted by her priests. When she passed, the people did homage by ceasing all warfare and laying aside their weapons. They donned their festive attire and began to quarrel until the goddess again retired to her sanctuary. Then both Kar and Goss were bathed in a secret lake, the Schwarzsee in Lurgan, which swallowed up the slaves who had assisted the bathing, and once more the priests resumed their watch over the sanctuary and grove of Nerthus Lodin to await her next appearance. In Scandinavia, this goddess was also known as Huldra, and boasted a train of attendant wood nymphs, who sometimes sought the society of mortals to enjoy a dance upon the village green. They could always be detected, however, by the tip of a cow's tail which trailed from beneath their long snow-white garment. These Huldra folk were the special protectors of the cattle on the mountainsides, and were said to surprise the lonely traveler at times by the marvelous beauty of the melodies they sang to beguile the hours at their tasks. So, I honestly think that, although it is pretty well known that a lot of your Norse and Germanic and even into the Russian steppes, a lot of the mythologies are very, very similar, possibly the exact same deities. However, this author, it really feels like she's mixing stuff and just throwing things together that don't go together. They just don't mesh. I mean, it's tales of Norse mythology, not medieval. I do not like it. I don't like the book. You know, I am a Norse heathen, so to me they are. You know, these are all my gods and goddesses that she's telling the stories of, and mixing things. You know, and goddesses some goddesses are being downplayed as being just attendants. Some of the attendants are attendants, but some of them were actually goddesses of their own right. So, anyway, until next time, Tales of Norse Mythology by Helen A. Guerber, Society Archer, signing out.